Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Kyle Bauer, and I will be talking to you today about Atlas TI and its everyday use possibilities. So today we'll talk about independently exploring the many functions of Atlas TI and how we can efficiently organize the data according to project needs. And finally, touching on planning for how to move forward with your analysis by using basic analytical tools. So we'll move that box right there. First, I want to get our brains into gear talking about questions, because questions form the basis of any research. So asking questions of your data is a really important step to do before using Atlas TI, but also to continue questioning yourself and your research throughout your process, your data analysis process. So there are small questions, there are bigger questions. This is just a cartoon that I felt was a funny way how we can sometimes ask questions and they lead to bigger questions and more complicated. And sometimes we ask questions that we don't know the answers to. And Atlas TI really helps us with all of these different types of questions. So we'll circle back around to this concept multiple times throughout this presentation. Okay. All right, there we go. So Atlas TI, first to give some background information, it was released in 1993. A lot of people are so surprised that it goes back that far, but it does. And that was for Windows. The Mac version was released in September of 2014. And more recently, there are now iPad and Android applications. So you can upload the app to your tablet and do some preliminary analyses on your tablet. And most recently, they're beta testing a virtual platform for Atlas TI. So that's really exciting also. The headquarters are in Germany, and if you go to the Atlas TI website, which we'll talk more about at the end of this presentation, this is an international software. So there are trainers like myself all over the world, and Atlas TI is also available in multiple languages, not just English. And then lastly, the North American office is located in Oregon. And it's just important to keep in mind, and you'll see this as we go through the demonstration, that this software was developed by researchers for researchers. So what that basically means is that there will be multiple ways of doing things, and it allows for a lot of flexibility, which that gets us into what Atlas TI actually does. So it facilitates the qualitative analysis of research data. So it offers an organized, transparent, and integrated platform. So we'll talk about this, that there are multiple ways to do any one thing in Atlas TI, because when we're working with our personal, unique research projects, there's going to be different objectives. And it was really important for Atlas TI, the developers of the program, to develop something where it didn't matter what kind of research you were doing. It would be functional, making up my own words, functional for anybody using it. So there is a lot of flexibility built in to help with semi-structured interviews, focus groups, field notes, archiving data and literature reviews, photo voice, and ethnographic videos. And the list goes on even further than that. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about literature reviews as an aspect of Atlas TI for every day. So just a heads up, a little foreshadowing into what we'll be doing. So qualitative data analysis software, and you'll see right up here the acronyms CAQDAS. Sometimes people leave out the CA, so depends on the person writing about it, but both ways of writing it are acceptable. So what qualitative data analysis software can do is impose a structure on unstructured data. So that's the organization component. Make visible your analytic strategies. So it really helps you develop your design. First, you'll write out your design and you'll think about it, and then you'll actually go in and implement it. And Atlas TI is able to help you along that process. You can make your projects portable. Like I mentioned before, with your tablet, you can project bundle and share and save your projects. And then also with the virtual platform that they're developing currently. Supports collaboration with others. So there you can share your projects with other co-researchers. And there's some really neat ways of, and the next point too, is forming audit trails. So you can see how each user is using or interacting with the project along the way. And then I think most importantly is that Atlas TI can assist in every phase of your study. So you don't necessarily have to start using Atlas TI when you have data. You can start using Atlas TI in your preliminary phases when you're brainstorming and working with your literature before the analysis even begins. And then after your analysis is over, it keeps evolving with you to form those conceptual linkages that I think we all kind of want to aim for. So on the other side, what qualitative data analysis software cannot do, it does not analyze your data for you. It does not take any control away from you. So there is, again, a lot of flexibility with Atlas TI and other data software interfaces, is that you get what you put into it. So that's really important to know, especially as you begin building your project. Make the analysis process easier and faster. It will not do that for you. It's not a shortcut. It helps you with organization and sometimes streamlining the process because it's kind of a one-stop shop type of deal, but the actual analysis process is not going to be sped up or made easier necessarily by using Atlas TI or any other data management software. And then it does not support one type of analysis. So it's not just for grounded theory or just for discourse analysis. You can use this software in multiple different ways, which we'll get into in just a couple minutes. And then next, the functions of Atlas TI. So these are the major functions of Atlas TI. And these go into your objectives and your analytical plan, but also as this evolves, it creates a really bi-directional process. So documents, quotations, codes, memos, networks, groups. That's just a quick summary of a lot of the terminology we'll go over today. And those aspects of Atlas TI will impact your objective and analytic plan, but your analytic plan and objectives will also impact how you use those different components. You can use them in a very compartmentalized way, or you can integrate them. Today, we probably won't get into much integration, that leads us into a more conceptual conversation, and that's usually saved for more advanced instruction in Atlas TI and in qualitative methods in general. And Atlas TI is organized by managers, which I'll show you in just a second. So like we had on the last slide, you have the components, and then for each component, you have a manager. So there are different ways you can look at your documents, quotations, codes. You can list them, you can see frequencies, you can see how they're linked eventually. And these managers allow you to interact with the different components in different ways. And I put a little asterisk by links manager because that one I likely will not show you today. Again, that is making semantic and non-semantic links in between and among different aspects of your data. And it leads us to a much broader, more conceptual conversation. And in my experience of doing this, it's a little overwhelming. So although it's available to you, and I want to make sure that you all know that, we will not go over the links manager today. Okay, and so that's a quick overview of Atlas TI and what I'm about to show you. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, great. So I will go on and I will now minimize that, and we will bring up Atlas TI. So let's put you over here. Okay. Bring this up. So this is what you would, so let me back up. First of all, I've already uploaded some documents and put in some codes and created a memo for you. So if you come into Atlas TI, you'll see all of this would be empty. And I'm also important to note that I'm showing you Atlas TI on a Mac. If you're working with Windows, the interface looks very different. Both work very similarly, but where things are located is much different between a Windows version versus a Mac version. So again, if you are working with Windows or if you think you might be working with Windows, just feel free to email me after this webinar and I can help navigate you through that interface. So this again is Atlas TI. To add these documents, this little plus button on the Mac version is your friend. So right here is where you would import documents, linked multimedia, geo documents, which is another thing we probably won't get to today, codes, memos, and networks. So you can import and add new types of data here. Also with a Mac, you have all of your managers are located up here. So in the PowerPoint just a second ago, I talked about the managers of various aspects of data. So you have your document manager, your quotation manager, code, memo, network managers, all up here. Okay, so prior to starting this, I set up a demo for you all, and I added 10 documents right here. Another side note is if you decide you want to just play around with Atlas TI and you don't want to commit quite yet, you can get a free version. And in the free version, you can upload up to 10 documents. So that's why I chose the number 10 this time. And you can code and interact with Atlas TI very similarly than the paid version. You're just limited in how much data you'd be able to analyze. So here I decided to show you how to put together a literature review in Atlas TI. again, this is trying to fulfill our goal of Atlas TI every day. So you don't necessarily have to have data to use Atlas TI. So I put in a lot of data, or documents that had a similar subject, which was qualitative data. Have a document on memoing, visual coding, instruction, qualitative data analysis instruction. So those are the type of documents I uploaded. In addition to the PDFs, I also wanted to share a picture and also a screencast that I had made, just to demonstrate the different types of data that you can upload into Atlas TI. So first, let's work with this PDF because it's pretty straightforward. You have again have a lot of flexibility in that you can make these, well, there we go. You can drag and make these bigger or smaller. There we go. So you can see this, and we can make this a little bit smaller. Well, ideally, you can make it smaller. Okay, so let's say you are doing you're compiling your literature review, and part of that is you want to just be able to pick up all the abstracts, right? Because that is the summary of the date of the PDF. So eventually you want to be able to see all the abstracts come together. So what I just did is I dragged and selected all the text. And you can add a code several different ways. So you can add a code like this. And you can also add a code on a Mac, it's Control-click. And you can add a code. So let's say this code now is abstracts. And then we'll add. And here's our code, abstracts. And you'll also see this blue bar has a 1:1. That is a quotation. So every segment of text that you highlight will be a quotation. And a quotation may or may not be attached to a code. So for example, say you also want the keywords. You decide that's a really important piece of information that you want to include in your literature review. But you're not quite sure you want to label it keywords. So in that instance, you would, it's not there, add quotation. So right here, new quotation from selection. And now we have this quotation, which is 1:2, and there's no code attached to it yet. So just to reiterate, you can have a quotation without a code, but you cannot have a code without a quotation. Every single code that you apply in Atlas TI will be attached to the quotation, because the quotation is the piece of raw data, right? It's the most basic form of data coming exactly from your document. Once you start adding codes, you start moving to a more conceptual understanding of your data. Okay, so let's go back to our quotations. Here we have the abstract quotation. And you'll see in this sidebar, and this is a function of Mac. So I will say in Windows, this information is in a completely different place. But in Mac, it's nice and convenient right here. So we'll go over the information that we see. The quotation is 1:1, which means it's the first quotation in the first document, because Burks et al. Is our first document right here. Now this is the abstract summary but you can add your own summary here. So this is summary of quotation. Okay, and then it tells you the document. And now we have the comment. So comments are a way for us to interact with our data at every single possible level you can think of. There's comments on quotations, there's comments on codes, there's comments on documents, on networks, on memos, and I'll go through all of that today. So here in the abstract, you could put whatever you want in this comment. What I like to suggest to people is think of your comments as your Twitter feed. So you don't really want to put a comment that's, 200, 300, 400 words. You don't really want to put that there. You want to just summarize it so you can eventually, weeks from now, months from now, years from now, understand what you were thinking when you decided to use this as a quotation or document it as a quotation. So here you might want to put the citation information. You could also say, I want to, of course, all the abstracts so I can cross-examine them. Right? So that's just a note to yourself. It can be very practical or it can be very personal. It just depends on you and how you want to interact with your data. I will say here, if you decide to systematically put your citation information in every single PDF file that you upload for a literature review, you can at the end, export a report for yourself. And once you have that report, it will export every single citation and eventually make your bibliography or your citations list for your project. So that's one possible, what's the word? Option, that's it. Option for using or putting citation information into your comments. So that again, and we have our code here, and this is our audit trail. So it was created by Kyle and changed by Kyle and the dates. And as you become more involved, you'll have more information here and maybe different users too, possibly. Okay, so you have the same options here for a code, right? So we have the code name, and just to slow down. So here we were with the quotation, and when I clicked on the code abstracts, it brought up the code information. So here's the code name. You can add a color to your code, and if you see here on the side panel on the left-hand side of the screen, it added the color to the code. Now, when you have 100 codes, 200 codes, these colors can be really helpful visually to visually link your codes together, just group them like codes together. And also, if you have a lot of codes in your document, you can easily scroll through and you'd be able to see where all the orange codes were. So that's when I said earlier about Atlas TI has a lot of different flexibility, that this is part of it. It allows you to interact with your data in numerous ways so you can achieve the objectives of your own project. So moving on, the colors here, you also have another option to comment on the code. Now, code comments I suggest you use them a little bit differently than quotation comments. Code comments are really where you want your definition, where you operationalize. So a code definition is very important in any aspect of qualitative data. When you use Atlas TI, as you evolve with your analysis, you'll notice that sometimes codes may get too big, or you'll realize that codes become too narrow. And this is why it's important to set a definition early on. That way, as you keep coding these documents and across documents, you'll be able to self-check. Does this code still uphold the definition that I originally created? If not, it might be time to split the code or regroup different codes. So it's a better representation of your analysis and the data that you've collected. Also, I'll say with the operationalization of codes, if you're working on multi-user projects, if there's multiple researchers, it's a good way to keep everybody on the same page. So if I'm working on a project and I have a co-investigator, we're both working with the same definition, and that keeps our coding reliable and begins to establish some rigor in our analytical process. Okay, and then next in this pane is the coded quotation. So it right here is also 1-1 because it's the first, I'm sorry, this is the coded quotation to which the code is linked, excuse me. But this is also the first code in this document, but it just doesn't show that here. So it will also show links. And so you just go through your documents and you would do the same thing over and over again. Now, when I just selected this text randomly, you'll notice that this pane again switches, right? So now the document is selected and has the title of the document, which you can rename if you so choose. And then again, you can use the comment in several different ways for the document. You can create a summary of the document, you can put your citation here if you'd like to, or link to the origin. So if you're using several online tools, maybe you have a URL that you want to put in there. Or it came from a news story that you saw that night, and you want to remember that you made that, that's where you found this document. So we have codes for documents, comments for documents, comments for quotations, and comments for codes. Now we're going to move over to our memos. But first, let me also show you this right here. So in this pane, both Windows and Mac have these nice boxes that help label things. So if you can't remember, it will show you. So here's our Explore table. Documents are little page rectangular shape. Quotations are circle with two little quotes inside. Codes are signified by diamonds. Memo looks like a memo pad, and this is a network. And a network kind of looks like a network visual. And again, here's the little pictures that go along with the types of data you have. Okay. Oh, and before I move on to memos, let me show you how you can also code a picture. So here I have a picture of an Atlas TI group that I did. So just like I did in the PDF, you drag and you drop, and you can, and I'll show you another technique for coding. So here we'll want to do, I want the code qualitative instruction. So I select the code, and as you see, I have this little arrow that changes, a little squiggly arrow, and now the plus, and I have just coded this picture qualitative instruction, right? And so I can comment on the picture that's highlighted, comment on the code, and then say I also want to highlight myself because I am the Atlas TI instructor. So you can create segments, quotation segments within quotation segments. That's possible, and you can go as many times as you want. You can also add multiple codes to a quotation. So this also, because I taught that Atlas TI workshop, that adds to my subjectivity as a researcher. So I want to code it both ways. You can add multiple code, as many as you want, and that conceptually makes sense. And then finally, this is a screencast. So it's a video, and I'll play it. Okay, so that's a little segment of the data, and let's see, to scroll, it's very easy. Just scroll down, and you can go to different parts of the screencast or the video. If you're video recording interviews, very easily done. And then to create a quotation, you drag and drop, and then you have your quotation. This will be attached to the audio. And then to add on to the code, drag and drop, just like you would in any other kind of document. Right down here is where you can change the speed of the audio. So if you're just trying to listen quickly, you can speed it up. If the audio is difficult for you to hear, you can slow it down. It will mark your codes in here, play, stop, all that wonderful stuff is right there, so you can play with your audio as much as you want. Okay, so now let's move on to memos. And I get this question a lot when I talk about memos. Why would you want to do a memo? Why is a memo different than a comment, right? A comment is in that little box that I showed you that's attached to, that you have the ability to add to each element of your data analysis. Well, like I said before, a comment is kind of your Twitter summary. Very short, gets to the point, stays very close to the data. But when your thoughts and your reflections start to become more evolved and more sophisticated, that's when you might want to go to your memo and think about things, reflect on what you did that day. And this is where also you can begin your experience using Atlas TI before you have any data. You can start memoing your design process, creating your research questions, logging your time and your work that you've spent creating this project. You can do all of that in a memo. Think about it. One way to think about it is as your research diary. So even before you start transcribing your data and uploading it and putting it into Atlas TI, you can start with your memos. So here I created a little memo about memos. And there's some literature on why mapping your research through memos is an important aspect of your qualitative data analysis. So identifying central research questions, using memos to record ideas for individual data segments, and then use the letters and characters of the alphabet and abbreviations to structure and organize the list of memos. So that's a tip for how to, once you have over in this section, maybe 10 different memos, you could say research diary, research timeline, research brainstorming. By putting research at the very beginning, you will organize those like memos together. And as you see, I did that also with the coding. So instead of putting participant subjectivity and researcher subjectivity, I put subjectivity first and then the qualifier or the adjective, right? The adjective, yes. Next after it. So that way it organizes itself nicely in the list. Okay, so that's and then of course the very right-hand side pane, you can name your memo, also comment on your memo. So here you could create a summary of what this memo is all about, so your memos can stay very organized. And then you have networks. Let me go back to I put in an example because I knew we wouldn't be able to interact with the data a lot in this webinar. So very quickly, I'll show you what a network looks like. So here, let me make this a little bit bigger. So here you have the code, and then I have all the quotations that are attached to the code. And you can see how this concept is being enriched by the data, or this code concept is being enriched by the data. You'd also be able to conceptually link codes in a network, and visualize your information beyond just lists and within the document. You can visualize your data outside the document. Again, this is a more conceptually advanced technique. I would not suggest trying to create codes in your preliminary analysis. You really need to have a good grounding of your coding before you start playing with your networks. Okay. So that is the quick introduction to Atlas TI, and I'd really like to open up for questions right now, because I'm sure I forgot something. So if there's any questions, just let me or Leanne know.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for that. This is Leanne speaking. We have had some people join us, and I just wanted to remind them, if they're using their computer, there is a chat box down at the very bottom of the screen. You're welcome to address any questions with us via the chat box, or you're welcome to unmute your microphones at this time and ask away.
Well, while people are thinking of questions, I know this stuff can be kind of overwhelming when you get a quick, 15, 20-minute introduction to it. So I want to I'll go ahead and share these additional resources. So Atlas TI has a very nice website. I use it a lot, even being an instructor. There's always updates and new tools being used, and in true qualitative fashion, they are very reflexive, and they implement a lot of the feedback that they get. So it's challenging because the software is always evolving, but it's really nice because they actually listen to their users and really aim to create a software program that can answer and help with all different kinds of projects. So with that said, the website is always being updated. Like I mentioned earlier, you could get a free trial version if you want to play with the software and see if it works for you, if it's something you'd like. And like I stated before, feel free to just upload some of your literature review or from your literature, some of your literature that you have on file and start coding it as if you're in a class or if you are writing a paper. Play with the coding functions and the commenting functions, all that good stuff. For more advanced practices with Atlas TI, there's additional training with free training videos. They have a YouTube channel. And then, of course, you can contact me or one of my colleagues. And if you have just a couple questions, we are more than happy to answer via email, basic questions. And then we can also do more formal trainings for groups or one-on-one training. And those are usually a fee for service. And then there are 2 books that I wanted to share with you all, especially if you're in the beginning stages of your qualitative data analysis, design, whatever, even just thinking you might want to do qualitative research. This is a great book, Qualitative Analysis Using Atlas TI. If you don't want to use Atlas TI and you want to use MaxQDA or let's see which other one, or NVivo, they also have the same book for the different software packages. So it's a great resource, lots of examples, lots of pictures, and personal experience. I got this book for my own use, and I wish I had it years ago. And the second book I put on here is by Suzanne Fries, and she walks you through Atlas TI. There's a new edition being released in early 2019. So I highly suggest getting that book as well. And then lastly, here's my information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to help.
We'll give a couple more minutes for if anybody else has thought of something they'd like to ask Dr. Bauer. And just as a reminder, we will go ahead and post this video up on the SGS website under video resources. I'll also include the additional resources that Kyle shared with us so that people will continue to have the link to the books and the resources as well as Dr. Bauer's contact information. Are there any questions at this time? Kyle, I actually have one for you.
Oh, okay. Great.
My own qualitative research attempts, which are very, very premature at this point, I did at one point try NVivo, and I was just curious if you could potentially talk about why maybe Atlas TI is a bit, maybe talk across the platforms in a comparison and why you would prefer this over another software.
So I can and I can't. So because my experience without Atlas TI really outweighs the other software packages. Throughout my educational career, I've been introduced to them. And so all I can say, without sounding too biased, is that to me, Atlas TI was the most intuitive. And I can say that for both Mac and Windows platforms. And I really, really appreciate the interactive nature of Atlas TI, especially having gone through my entire dissertation using Atlas TI, and the memos, the comments on documents, quotations, networks, and codes, those were a lifesaver when I went to go write up my findings for my dissertation. Because some of my preliminary analysis really started while I was collecting data, which was at some points maybe a year and a half prior to defending my dissertation, and trying to remember where I was conceptually a year and a half ago would have been impossible had it not been for the interactive capabilities of Atlas TI. Memoing helped me. I did create a research journal or research diary. So each day, when I was really heavily into my analysis, when I had to stop and start, I wasn't having to waste time figuring out where I left off. I was able to see what I did the day before, pick it up, see my notes, see where I was just mentally and psychologically also, and pick up from there and add to something or add to the project the following day. And when I was maybe I was less into my analysis, but more into my writing and conceptualization, moving in between those phases, my research diary then took on a different tone and I created different memos for my brainstorming. So that's why I really liked Atlas TI versus the rest. Also, when I was beginning all of this, Atlas TI came out with a Mac version, and I'm a Mac user. So that was another, I guess, push towards Atlas TI versus the other interfaces. And I know now there are versions, Mac and Windows versions for just about all of them, if not all. But that was just a contributing factor when I started.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Does anybody have any additional questions for Dr. Bauer? Well, then I'll ask another one.
Okay, yeah, please.
I know a lot of people who may be on this call or watching this video at some point are going to be entering various phases of their either thesis or their dissertation process. It sounds like you're suggesting that it is never too early to start utilizing these types of software. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. I think the earlier the better. Okay. And I especially when I work with undergrads in our lab or graduate students in our lab, I do try to say, hey, look, you get 4, 5, 6 articles every single week from your classes, from your professors. Start putting those in. And instead of annotating them in a PDF, in Adobe Acrobat, annotate those articles in Atlas TI. That way, when the stakes are greater, when you've got that timeline crunch of, I've got to get this master's thesis out, I've got to get this dissertation out, you don't necessarily have to spend all that time learning the steep curve, or attending to the steep learning curve of a data analysis software package. And I think with any kind of technology, there is a learning curve. And if you are interested in going this direction, I would highly suggest, taking a couple hours just a couple hours each week, read those articles in Atlas TI, start creating quotations, adding a code or two, And then from there, once you start understanding the basics and start learning that language, the other stuff really falls into place. So when you're in your master's or dissertation process, you can then use your energies to make those conceptual linkages and interactions and networks and all that fancy stuff that we always want to do, but it's hard. It's difficult.
Is it ever too late to start using Atlas TI?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think if you are committed to learning it, it will be a great tool for you. So, for example, if I were to talk to some faculty, they could possibly use Atlas TI as, you might want to assign a literature review to your students, right? Or might want to assign a research paper exercise. Well, incorporate Atlas TI, the free version, just the free version. Require the students to have 10 different sources of literature and compile an annotated bibliography using Atlas TI. So that way you guys can learn together. And I think that's a really nice classroom environment. And again, there are fewer stakes when it's in the classroom. Then I would say, $1 million grant or pressure for publications from your department head. You can explore this in a class setting also.
Exceptionally helpful. Thank you so much.
Well, good. I'm glad. I hope it was.
Oh, for certain. Sierra, any questions from you? Our other callers have probably had to go on to their next meetings of the day, but we'll wrap this up if you don't have any other questions, Sierra, or?
Not from me.
Okay, wonderful. I'll stop recording. Just a minute to thank Dr. Bauer again for her time sharing Atlas TI for every day with us. And we will see you at our next webinar, which will be scheduled for the month of December. Thank you.